Hey guys, welcome back to the True Crime Podcast. My name's Luke.
I'm Gabby.
I'm Nick.
And I'm Audrey.
In this episode, we will be talking about the Menendez brothers. For those who don't know, Lyle and Eric Menendez were two brothers from Beverly Hills who became famous for murdering their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, on August 20th, 1989. Today, we will dive deep into their background, an overview of the case, what's happening now, and our thoughts on the case. The Menendez brothers grew up surrounded by wealth, privilege, and pressure. Their father, Jose Menendez, was a Cuban immigrant who came to the United States in the 50s. Jose got a degree from Queen's University and quickly climbed up the corporate ladder. After marrying Mary Louise Anderson, known as Kitty, they had two children. Lyle, known as the confident and outgoing older brother, was born on January 10, 1969. Eric, who was the quieter and shy younger brother, was born on November 27, 1970. About 10 years after they were born, the Menendez family moved from New Jersey to an exclusive neighborhood in Beverly Hills. While they might have looked like the perfect, successful family on the outside, there were a ton of things going on behind the scenes. Jose expected perfection out of his sons and was known to put an intense amount of pressure on the boys, whether it was playing tennis, swimming, or just life in general. Along with that, by the 1980s, the image of this perfect family began to fade. Lyle Menendez attended Princeton, but was soon accused of plagiarism, and he was not allowed to return for the next school year. Also, Eric was involved in a string of burglaries and was ordered to attend therapy. During the trial, a man named Charles Wadlington, who was the boys' tennis coach, testified that Jose Menendez was the harshest person he ever met. Along with Jose being tough on them, we learned that he also might have been sexually abusing them. The defense stated an argument of alleged sexual abuse and that the brothers killed their parents in fear of their life. They claimed that the years of trauma that Jose put them through led to years of fear and mistrust, and eventually murder. In an article titled "Murder in the Family, the Menendez Brothers," they say as many as 16% of men in the United States experience childhood sexual abuse, leading to several immediate as well as long-term consequences. Unresolved trauma of this nature has the potential to inflict social, psychological, physical, sexual, and family damage. With that being said, we will get started with Gabby talking about an interview of the case.
Starting off with their arrests and charges. On March 8, 1990, Lyle Menendez was arrested outside of his Beverly Hills home. Just a few days later, on March 11th, his younger brother Eric, who had been in Israel for a tennis tournament, returned to Los Angeles and was arrested at LAX. Both brothers were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder with special circumstances, which means that the death penalty was on the table under California law. And from there, the case would explode into one of the most publicized cases of the decade, with two trials occurring before Lyle and Eric were convicted. The first trial began in 1993 and lasted until early 1994. It was presided over by Judge Stanley Weisberg, and unlike most trials, this one was televised, turning the Menendez brothers into household names overnight. The defense team took a bold approach. They didn't deny that Lyle and Eric had killed their parents. Instead, they argued why, claiming the murders were acts of desperation, not greed. The brothers took the stand and made shocking allegations. They said their father, Jose Menendez, had sexually abused them for years, abuse that began when Eric was just 6 years old and continued until he was 18. They described their father as tyrannical, controlling, and cruel, and their mother, Kitty, as emotionally unstable, addicted to drugs, and unwilling to protect them. The defense said the brothers believed their parents were planning to kill them to silence them after years of torment. Psychological experts testified that Lyle and Eric suffered from battered child syndrome and post-traumatic stress disorder, arguing the murders were a defense act, born from fear rather than greed. But the prosecution painted a very different picture. They said the murders were premeditated. The brothers had purchased the shotguns days before the killings, a clear sign of planning. When Jose and Kitty had multiple shots fired at their heads, they were sitting peacefully in their living room, showing no immediate threat that could justify self-defense for Lyle and Eric. The prosecution claimed that the real motive behind the murders was money. After their parents' deaths, the brothers spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on Rolex watches, Porsche cars, and even a restaurant investment. To the state, that wasn't fear, it was greed. They argued that the abuse story was fabricated after the fact, once the brothers realized that they were under investigation. Now, here's where things got complicated. Because each brother's statements could implicate the other, there were actually two juries for this first trial, one for Lyle and one for Eric. After months of testimony and media frenzy, both juries became dreadlocked. The majority of jurors believed the abuse defense and voted for manslaughter, while a smaller group insisted on first-degree murder. The split couldn't be resolved. So, in January of 1994, Judge Weisberg declared a mistrial. The first Menendez trial, one of the most watched in television history, had ended with no verdict. But the story didn't end there. In 1995, the case was retried, this time with one jury for both brothers, and under much tighter control. Judge Weisberg made major changes for the second trial. He banned cameras from the courtroom, ensuring no more televised drama, and limited the testimony about sexual abuse and the brothers' emotional state. Time magazine's article titled "Second Time Around" highlights this by explaining that Judge Stanley Weisberg has banned cameras from his courtroom. He has also ruled that the brothers be tried together, as the separate juries last time created too much confusion. The article also stated that the state's new team, headed by Deputy District Attorney David Kahn, insists that this time the prosecution will focus on the murders themselves, rather than get derailed by the defense's claims that Lyle and Eric were sexually and emotionally abused by their parents. During this trial, the prosecution once again highlighted the brothers' spending spree after the murders, using financial records, receipts, and witness testimony to drive home their argument that the killings were motivated by greed. The defense repeated the abuse claims, but this time their ability to fully explain the psychological impact was significantly restricted. Finally, on March 20th, 1996, after years of trials, media attention, and public debate, the verdict came down. Both Lyle and Eric Menendez were found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. They were spared the death penalty, but on July 2nd, 1996, Judge Weisberg sentenced them to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read. The saga that had gripped America for years had come to an end. And now Nick is going to explain the public opinions and what they have thought about this case over the past decades.
So, the murder side of the media has almost never stopped obsessing over this case for the past 30 years, with the Menendez brothers feeding into the media even from behind bars, which causes even things like Forbes magazine, who crowns them as America's top celebrity felons. And the majority of the public were roped back into this recently with the new coverage of this case and TV shows and Netflix documentary. The public seems to be split into two sides about the brothers. One side believes that they are the stereotypical ultimate Hollywood brats that killed their parents to live the high life, while the other side believes that this was truly a self-defense case, with the brothers defending themselves or moreover snapping finally after years of abuse from their parents. Whatever side you are on, you cannot deny that this case has brought up many subjects such as first-degree murder, child and sexual abuse, along with financial gain to the spotlight. In the 80s, when this case first arose, most people viewed the brothers as cold-hearted killers who wanted money for spending sprees. However, as the times changed and people became interested in child abuse and its long-term effects, the Menendez brothers became put in a more childlike, innocent lighting, with people believing that the abuse and its long-term mental effects were the true reason for the murders. Nonetheless, the Menendez brothers are a popular topic with never-ending discussions online. The Menendez brothers' story has impacted even the younger generations, with them inspiring things like TikTok trends and some Gen Zs taking from their fashion sense. This kind of new spotlight from the younger generation has certainly helped out the brothers in their new trial. I believe that the Menendez brothers are able to stay in the spotlight due to them being considered attractive by most people, which helps their image of just being two men who fought back against their abusive parents. Another reason for believing that their actions were justified is the fact that the Menendez brothers case sort of happened at the right time. Mental illnesses and long-term effects of abuse had just become the forefront to a lot more people's attentions, which I believe this causes the Menendez brothers to be sort of pitied by a lot of people who believed that they were abused and didn't kill their parents for strictly financial gain. On the flip side of that coin, especially during the 80s, most people just thought that the brothers were evil and cold-hearted, and that the only reason for their parents' death was because they wanted to go and live the high life and just needed a means to do it. And that this whole abuse thing is just an alibi or an excuse as to why they killed their parents so violently. And the court, during the first trial, suits this narrative better, as the court declared that there wasn't enough evidence to say that the brothers were truly abused by their father. But what also doesn't help the brothers' case is, in my opinion, is that right after they killed their parents, they went on a huge shopping spree instead of feeling remorseful or being grief. I think that the action is what truly set the cold-hearted and evil tone for them to the public in the 80s. I also think that this kind of holds true to this day, because no matter how attractive these people are, or whether they killed their parents out of defense or not, they still ended up killing their parents and then went on a huge shopping spree, almost like a way of taunting their death. And then they also switched up their story from saying that they found them dead to admitting that they finally killed their parents. And those actions just didn't help them out at all with the public opinion when this case first arose. But overall, I think that there is two good arguments for each side of this case. However, I personally believe that the Menendez brothers saw the attention that they were getting from all over the world, and especially nationwide, and decided to use that for an advantage to hopefully get out of this in a sense, or at least avoid the death penalty. And now that's why they keep feeding into the media today, even though it's been 30 years, because they're still trying to find a way out, or they're trying to get some benefits while in prison. And it is really working. Because of the attention they have gotten, another trial, which is why I believe, due to the pity they received from all these people who think that they have been severely abused, and that was the whole reason for the murder of their parents. What side do you lean with, Luke?
I have mixed opinions about this case. On the surface, I think what they did was horrible. I do definitely believe something bad was going on in that house, but killing your parents in cold blood is just something so many people, including me, could never even think about. But when I think about their side of the story, and think about the years of the alleged sexual abuse, pressure, and trauma, I couldn't imagine how they felt. I know fear and trauma can make people do insane things. On the other hand, the prosecution's case of the Menendez brothers killing their parents for financial gain makes a ton of sense, especially after their huge spending spree shortly after. Along with that, I think it makes them look super guilty to try to say they found their parents' bodies, then immediately go spend a ton of their money, and then later admit that they killed them. Overall, I personally feel like I don't know who to believe, and when the argument comes up about getting them out of jail, or that they should have gotten away with it, I have to disagree. And I know they claim that they feared for their life and thought their parents were going to kill them after years of abuse, but I can't stop thinking that they could have easily moved out or gotten help, especially with Lyle being 21 and Eric being 18. In my opinion, taking someone's life, especially your parents, deserves consequences. While I don't think they're complete monsters like the media has portrayed them as, I do think they deserve to be in jail. What do you think, Gabby?
In my opinion, the Menendez brothers' case is one of the most tragic and complicated examples of how family abuse and privilege can intertwine. Lyle and Eric Menendez's decision to murder their parents was undeniably brutal and unjustifiable, but their testimony about enduring years of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse adds layers of psychological complexity. If what they claimed about their father's abuse and mother's neglect is true, then the brothers grew up in an environment filled with fear, manipulation, and control. I believe that trauma like that can distort someone's sense of safety and rational thinking, possibly driving them towards desperate and irrational decisions. Their accounts during the trial, including vivid details of the abuse, felt sincere and suggested that they were emotionally scarred long before the murders ever occurred. However, it is also impossible to ignore how their actions after the murders complicated their defense. The brothers went on a lavish spending spree, buying luxury cars, expensive clothes, and taking vacations, which made it seem as if money was their true motive. Their behavior appeared inconsistent with the two young men who supposedly killed out of terror and self-preservation. That lack of visible remorse and the methodical nature of killings, using shotguns and firing repeatedly, gave prosecutors strong evidence that the murders were premeditated. Even if their fear was genuine, the excessive violence and what followed made it difficult for many to sympathize with them fully. Ultimately, I think the truth lies in the gray area between guilt and victimhood. The Menendez brothers were both perpetrators and products of a deeply dysfunctional home. Their actions can't be excused, but they also can't be understood without acknowledging the lasting psychological damage of abuse. I see their case as a failure of communication and mental health support long before the tragedy occurred. If they had received help, intervention, or someone willing to believe them earlier, perhaps none of it would have happened. The Menendez case forces society to confront uncomfortable questions about how trauma, wealth, and justice interact and whether the legal system can ever truly balance punishment with understanding. What do you think about the case, Audrey?
After doing my research on the Menendez case, I have come to the conclusion that I believe the Menendez brothers deserve at least some measure of justice. While I don't excuse the violence of their crimes at all, I believe they deserve justice that acknowledges the horrific circumstances and documented trauma that led to the brothers feeling that they needed to commit the murders. They need to face the consequences of their horrific actions, but also deserve the due process of considering every aspect of what could have happened. While it was perhaps a step in the right direction for their case to be reconsidered and a resentencing to be made, the case is very complex and many factors need to be considered. From the beginning of this case, it has been greatly influenced by outside opinions and severe public scrutiny. The case was initially painted as two spoiled, wealthy kids who murdered their parents for their inheritance, which on a surface level is something unforgivable. But when the details of the circumstances that led to these murders came to light, they were somewhat ignored by the court system. At this time, many even failed to acknowledge that the type of abuse the brothers claimed to be subjected to could even happen to boys. Extreme prejudice and a bit of a double standard really influenced the outcome of the case and diminished the validity of the Menendez brothers' claims that their father had sexually abused them and that their mother had just sat by doing nothing about it. It was hard for the brothers to even admit that they had been subjected to such abuse because of the criticism that they could have faced from the public and the shame that they could have felt from admitting such horrific experiences out loud, which perhaps only led to less belief from the judge and jury when these details did come out. These details were met with great skepticism by many people, but after trauma experts and psychologists evaluated the brothers, their claims seemed to become more valid. The brothers could have felt trapped, they believed they wouldn't be protected, and then they finally snapped when they just couldn't take it anymore. I don't believe that anybody could grow up in a household like the one they allegedly did and not have some kind of mental trauma or not be pushed to a breaking point eventually. The severity of the retaliation is very extreme, though, and perhaps indicates that their childhood filled with abuse manifested itself in a severely clouded judgment of how to help themselves. They thought they were going to be killed, and so they took action first. While this is certainly an action that should receive severe consequences, I do think a perspective of self-defense should be one that is considered in their case. One thing that I can't really wrap my brain around is the spree of carelessness and spending that the brothers went on after they committed the murders. Many people have had many different speculations for the reasoning behind these actions. Some use these details as evidence that it was not self-defense and that they just wanted the inheritance of their parents, but others have claimed that it was them trying to cover up their tracks and have an alibi. This is a part of the case that has brought lots of public debate and discourse on the motives of the brothers' crimes. It is one thing that makes me lean a little bit more towards their total guilt rather than the innocence that they claim. I think that it could have been them kind of taking revenge on their parents as well as going out and doing everything they wanted with their money now that they were dead. It could have been some way to get back at them for the years of trauma and abuse they had been subjected to. Overall, I don't think the fact that the Menendez brothers actually killed their parents is up for debate. They definitely did, and they definitely deserve to serve time for those crimes. All factors need to be considered, and the amount of prison time they served should reflect the crimes, but also the circumstances of the crimes. To finish up this episode, we want to give you the recent status of the Menendez case. According to a 2025 NPR article written by Rachel Traceman and Alana Wise, the Menendez brothers were resentenced in May 2025 after having already served 3 decades in prison. In 2023, their lawyers had filed a habeas corpus petition in an effort to have the courts consider new evidence regarding their father, Jose Menendez's sexual abuse towards them. This evidence included letters written in 1988 by Eric to his cousin. These letters described the sexual abuse of their father. Other new evidence included claims from a member of the band Menudo, which was managed by Jose Menendez in the 1980s, of being drugged and raped by him when he was a teenager. In addition to this new evidence, though, the case of the Menendez brothers has also had a resurgence of attention after the release of a very popular Netflix true crime drama, Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, in 2024. This dramatized version of events was incredibly popular and prompted groups of the American public to begin to vocalize their opinions on the case once again and call for justice for the Menendez brothers. Even relatives of the brothers began to band together to demand for a resentencing. Even in the midst of the resentencing, though, the district attorney has continued to criticize the brothers' claims of sexual abuse, as many people have. These claims continue to be called misleading and fabricated, which are factors that must be considered if the brothers are to be considered for parole. Many factors were considered in the process of the resentencing. Not only was the omission of new evidence considered, but also the complexity of sexual violence they were subject to, and their continuous efforts in prison to rehabilitate themselves and others. The brothers have earned multiple college degrees, begun projects for the beautification of their San Diego prison, mentored other inmates and also earning college degrees, worked as caregivers for elderly inmates, and both even got married while in prison. Even many who do not agree that the Menendez brothers should be released have acknowledged the good work that they have done behind bars. They have not always been perfect prisoners, though. They have had some previous rule violations, such as illegal cell phone usage, and also risk assessments that are weighed heavily in the consideration of their parole. While originally convicted in 1996 and receiving life sentences without the possibility of parole, after serving 35 years, their 2025 resentencing resulted in 50 years to life with eligibility for parole. Thank you for listening to the True Crime Podcast, and hopefully we'll see you next week.